You may or may not be aware of Bobby's perspective. He's a carnivore diet promoting YouTuber, and he's made a video titled Humane Hancock Vegan God Complex. Within his video lies a vast array of logical fallacies and contradictions.
Out of your religious belief system, this makes sense, and everybody that will disagree with your belief system doesn't make sense. Don't you see how religious this is?
In his video, Bobby criticizes veganism by calling it a religion. Ironically, 2 weeks after he posted this video, he created another video coming out as a born-again Christian.
It was obvious, it was crystal clear, it was aligned. I knew that I had to become Christian.
All irony aside, this claim that veganism is like a religion seems to come up a lot, so I want to make it abundantly clear. A belief in equal consideration for non-humans is not necessarily based on a spiritual conviction. Rather, non-humans deserve equal consideration because the evidence suggests they have the capacity to feel, perceive, and experience subjectively. Therefore, my decision to live a vegan lifestyle isn't based on faith, it's based on evidence. Before we delve into the video, I just want to give a quick update that the cinematic trailer to my documentary exploring the psychological and physiological effects of slaughterhouse work will soon be released. I'm so excited for you to see it. And with this project, there's been so much work going on behind the scenes that I'm just really excited to be able to get something concrete out there onto my YouTube channel. And of course, none of this would have been possible without my wonderful patrons. Honestly, I cannot express how thankful I am to you. Anyway, let's get on with the video.
You notified me about Humane Hancock and his God complex. Today we're gonna have a closer look at his video titled The Vegan Blind Spot. Let's go.
I want to begin this video by just explaining what motivated me to go vegan.
Please
I
do
basically became aware of a large amount of suffering, and I realized there was something I could do to reduce that suffering.
Okay, wait a second. So first and foremost, you found out about some sort of suffering that you then in your mind equated to bad. Where your morality or ethics come from, we do not know. You decided that this suffering equals bad.
Suffering does seem intuitively bad to me. When I suffer, it's clear to me that I do not like the experience and want it to end. Furthermore, all the empirical evidence we have regarding the neurochemical underpinnings of our subjective experiences suggests that pain or suffering is experienced negatively by other sentient beings. So, put simply, this is why I think suffering is bad and why it ought to be minimized. I also think it's essential to apply critical thinking, logic, and reason to the contradicting moral intuitions we have and try to resolve inconsistencies in our normative theories. Moreover, I think it may be worth explaining how our moral intuitions came about in the first place. Because, and this may come as a surprise to you, Bobby, there is absolutely no supernatural power of any kind required for this to happen. From an evolutionary perspective, having moral intuitions can have survival benefits. For instance, evolutionary biologists have argued that reciprocal altruism is a behavior whereby an organism acts in a manner that reduces its fitness while increasing another organism's fitness with the expectation that the other organism will act in a similar way in the future. An example of this comes from looking at the behavior of vampire bats. Vampire bats only feed on blood and will die after just 70 hours of not eating. Finding blood isn't such an easy task, and I'm talking from experience, of course, but when a bat does find a large animal to feed on, they're going to receive a large quantity of blood. So we have this situation where all these bats are struggling to find food, and when one bat does find food, they receive a large quantity of it. The bats that have found the blood feed the other hungry bats by regurgitating the blood. Excuse me. Reciprocal altruism has also evolved in humans.
Damn, I'm starving.
Oh, no worries. Just give me a minute. Now, if you imagine that humans are engaged in some form of reciprocal altruism in a small group who live in close proximity to each other, what happens when there's a cheater? Surely someone who takes all of the benefits of the altruistic behaviours of those around them without reciprocating those behaviours will be in an advantage, and therefore their genes will spread faster through the gene pool, meaning that we're all just a bunch of selfish cheaters who don't care about others. In other words, if a bat happily accepts the regurgitated blood of other bats but refuses to share the blood that he finds, then he will surely have a survival advantage over the other bats. Evolutionary biologists believe that we have evolved the ability to detect cheaters, so that we can refuse to cooperate with them in the future, meaning that the selfish individual is at a disadvantage compared to the individuals who are cooperating. It's easy to imagine how a sense of right and wrong can develop if our very survival depends on those around us acting fairly. And this is just one example. There are evolutionary reasons why we have developed a sense of right and wrong. Ultimately, it has reproduction and survival related benefits. So Bobby, we do not need to believe that there is a magical man in the sky deciding what is right and wrong.
The vegans kill more animals, destroy the habitat, and on top of that destroy human health.
Bobby doesn't provide any evidence for any of these claims and therefore commits a bare assertion fallacy. So after noticing that Bobby didn't provide evidence in his video, I thought I'd check his description box. Perhaps he's put the evidence there. I was wrong. Instead, I found another assertion, this time that I have a mental illness. Bobby, you can't just make claims without evidence and expect people to believe them. Otherwise, we could have people believing that there's some god who will be upset with you for wearing clothing that's made of two different kinds of materials. Do you see how ridiculous this sounds? Well, probably not.
And now you want to take your ideology and spread it to the masses. You want to brainwash more people into your religion.
I want to spread ideas and facts that I think will lead to a reduction in suffering. I want to have open discussions where we can criticize our ideas and see which ones come out on top. So no, Bobby, I am not trying to encourage people to join some dogmatic religion. Instead, I hope to encourage critical thinking and rationality. And again, 2 weeks after Bobby tried to criticize veganism by calling it a religion, he made another video coming out as a born-again Christian. You could not make this stuff up. We should try to reduce suffering if we can.
No, I do not agree at all. Yet again, why is suffering bad? Why should we reduce it? You don't list a reason for why. Suffering? Bad! I saw it on Disney, right? And therefore it must be bad. What is the reasoning behind it? What does it mean to suffer? Can suffering be transmuted into something positive? Perceived positive? Of course it can. If you take the example of bodybuilding, for example. You go to the gym, you bust your ass, you go through suffering in order to achieve something, right? And that idea can be multiplied and exaggerated. If you look into the mechanics of bodybuilding, yes, I'm a meathead. Then you will see that suffering in the gym equates to a sacrifice. You're sacrificing your time, you're sacrificing your comfort zone in order to gain something. In this case, muscle.
So let's take Bobby's example of bodybuilding. It seems that Bobby believes that suffering isn't necessarily bad because we can find examples where we have suffered and it has led to positive outcomes, such as increased muscle mass. However, while one could argue that in this particular situation, the positive effects of increased muscle mass outweigh the negative effects of working out, this only shows that in this particular situation, it may have been worth enduring the suffering to get the positive outcome. It doesn't show that suffering is somehow intrinsically good in itself. Imagine if you could avoid all of the suffering associated with bodybuilding and still get the benefits. No more leg days, no more shoulder injuries. Imagine if you could just take a protein shake, a magical protein shake, and you get your ideal physique. This would be extremely successful on the market, and whoever would invent such a thing would be a very rich person. It's obvious that farmed animals are suffering.
What? Why? Have you ever seen farms? Have you ever visited those animals? Why would they suffer? They have amazing lives. If you see grass-fed cattle, for example, they're in a safe zone. They can graze all day. They're basically in a candy store. That is heaven.
In the UK, the legal requirement for calling something grass-fed for milk, cheese and beef production is that the animals are fed on grass for more than half their lifetime. Do you think that spending around half your life on a field eating grass prevents you from experiencing suffering? Grass-fed animals can still be mutilated, can still be stolen from their mothers, and can still experience a knife going into their throat. Furthermore, the majority of cow flesh consumed in Europe and in the US come from factory farms. So even if I were to grant you that grass-fed animals didn't suffer at all, my claim that farmed animals are suffering would still be true.
They have an absolutely amazing life. If they would be in nature, they would get eaten from the asshole upwards. How do farm animals really suffer?
Here, Bobby is just appealing to a worse problem. He's suggesting that farmed animal suffering isn't as bad as wild animal suffering, and therefore farmed animal suffering is unimportant. Well, if you take into account the number of animals, wild animal suffering is worse than farmed animal suffering. But this doesn't disprove my point that farmed animals are suffering, and that this suffering urgently deserves attention. I agree with these premises, as I'm sure most of you will.
I'm sure, yeah, but I don't.
Then a logical conclusion would be we should try to reduce...
Okay, wait a second. Just because you say it's logical doesn't mean it is, right? Out of your religious belief system, this makes sense. And everybody that will disagree with your belief system doesn't make sense. Don't you see how religious this is?
So Bobby is illustrating a lack of understanding when it comes to formal logic here. Let me show you another example of a formal argument. So premise 1, all umbrellas are yellow. Premise 2, Bobby owns an umbrella. Conclusion, Bobby owns a yellow umbrella. In my example, the conclusion follows logically from the premises. Thus, if my premises are true, the conclusion must also be true. Therefore, if someone did accept the premises of my argument, they would have to accept the conclusion in order to be logically consistent. My video then goes into the topic of wild animal suffering, and puts my argument for why I think we should help wild animals into a syllogism. It is obvious that wild animals are suffering.
When?
Bobby says this before my video delves into explaining why there's reason to believe that the lives of wild animals contain large amounts of suffering. If you want to hear those reasons, you can watch the original video, The Vegan Blind Spot. If you want a more in-depth conversation on the topic of wild animal suffering, you can check out my podcast episode with Cosmic Skeptic. You'll find links to both these videos in the description box of this video. But I want to point out that a few minutes ago, Bobby argued that farmed animals aren't really suffering, and in fact, if they were in the wild, they would be suffering far more. Well, now Bobby is claiming that animals in the wild aren't suffering. The fact that we can find such obvious contradictions within just a few minutes of watching one of his videos leaves me in bewilderment that people actually take this guy seriously.
Where is this going? Yet again, if you rewind a little bit, you talk about, hey, there are 2 animals, then there are 100 animals, and then there are 2 again. Exactly, right? That is population control, a natural mechanism. If you stop that, you will overpopulate the planet. But wait a second, we already overpopulated by bad humans. So many bad humans are everywhere. But what about the animals, right? What about their carbon footprint? How about we have billions and trillions more animals? How is that sustainable? What are you saying?
I've never suggested that we should take away naturally occurring population control so that we can have billions more animals living in the wild. What I am saying is that wild animals matter, and we need more research looking into how we can reduce the suffering experienced by countless individuals living in the wild. But this is absurd. We can't just police
Why do you talk like that?
nature. Well, would we accept this statement if a natural disaster was about to cause a large amount of suffering and death to a large group of people?
Oh my god, you are equating fighting for your own survival, which is an intrinsic biological mechanism, to changing the blueprint of Earth. Do you understand this?
In my examples, I was discussing how we do intervene when it comes to helping other humans who are suffering from naturally occurring diseases or disasters. I wasn't talking about our own personal experience of suffering. My point is that whether the suffering of wild animals is occurring naturally or not is irrelevant. And to be consistent with the view that naturally occurring suffering shouldn't be challenged, we should stop trying to help people in the third world who are suffering from malaria. And Bobby, if by blueprint for Earth you mean the naturally occurring survival and reproduction pressures, then we absolutely have already changed this blueprint when it comes to human beings. And I'm sure you'll benefit from this new blueprint when you break your leg and require medical treatment.
This is the natural cycle, this is the natural food cycle.
Whether something is natural or not is irrelevant to whether it's good or desirable. We have naturally occurring things which are good, and we have naturally occurring things which are bad. This is a common fallacy that you'll see among carnivore YouTubers like Bobby.
This is what has to happen in order for this planet not to explode.
I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that by trying to reduce the suffering of sentient beings living in the wild, we will cause the planet to explode. So Bobby, please provide evidence for your claim, or at the very least, ask your God to stop the planet from exploding.
Just to sum it up yet again, guys, This is the God delusion, absolute egocentrical, narcissistic behavior of people that believe they have the truth. Based on what? Where do morals come from? Where do morals originate from? Do you believe in God? Yes or no? Do you believe in Darwinism? If you believe in Darwinism, why all of a sudden you do not believe in natural selection?
I've never said that I don't believe in natural selection. However, if you assert that things ought to be as they are in nature, then you would be committing an appeal to nature fallacy. Evolution does not care about the well-being of individuals. And while it's true that evolution has created all of us, there's no reason to think that all of the suffering that occurs on this planet is fixed and unchangeable. In fact, the evidence we have so far suggests the very opposite. Humans are continuously coming up with new and more sophisticated methods to improve our well-being and reduce negative experiences in our lives. I think we should extend this to all sentient life, as they, like us, could have better lives with higher levels of well-being than evolution by natural selection has brought about. Anyway, that's it for today, so thank you for watching this video, and a special thank you to my patrons who support this channel. You are the best.